Well, good afternoon, everyone. Bon après-midi. Last year, we announced the appointment of an external monitor, Jocelyn Terrien, who provides Canadians with a biannual assessment of our progress on cultural change in the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. Today, I have the privilege of releasing her second biannual report, and I'd like to take the opportunity to begin by thanking her for her hard work. It's Madame Terrien's job to track our progress in implementing the 48 recommendations that were given to us by former Supreme Court Justice Louise Arbour and other external reviews. And since day one of my mandate, I have tried to be very clear that supporting our people is my top priority, and that requires meaningful cultural change in the Canadian Armed Forces. In this report, Madame Terrien is equally clear and that we are taking action on all 48 recommendations. She notes that some of these recommendations have already been completed. Some are in progress and others are going to require continuous improvement. She has provided an assessment of where we are with each recommendation and what more must be done in order to implement them. In her May 2023 report, Madame Terrien noted that we did not at that time have a clear multi-year strategic plan for sustained progress, and that without this multi-year plan, we risk straying from our original goals and losing momentum. We took this very much to heart, and we've worked hard to build this multi-year plan over the past 6 months, which Madame Terrien acknowledges in her report. I want to also acknowledge that she has been helpful to us in putting together that plan, as has Justice Arbour as well. And we have reached several key milestones since her report update in May. In response to Madame Arbour's recommendations 7 and 9, we have made sure that Canadian Forces members can now go directly to the Canadian Human Rights Commission to have their cases heard. We have improved and expanded the mandate of the Sexual Misconduct Support and Resource Centre, giving people improved access to the resources that they need, as well as access to the reimbursement for legal assistance. And this is a direct response to recommendations 12, 13, and 14 of Justice Arbour's report. And we are repealing the counterintuitive duty to report regulations in the Canadian Armed Forces in response to Madam Justice Arbour's recommendation number 11. I believe we're making real progress. And by the end of this calendar year, approximately half of all Madam Justice Arbour's 48 recommendations will be implemented. Others will take longer, but we are fully committed to implementing these recommendations as well. We will soon take the necessary steps to definitively implement recommendation number 5 by removing military jurisdiction over criminal code sexual offences. And as well, we'll be launching a Canadian Military College Review Board, and I will be announcing its members very shortly. This board will be responsible for reviewing Canada's 2 military colleges, making recommendations on how to better protect officer cadets as they begin their careers in service to our country. I would like to conclude these remarks by offering, my very sincere thanks to our external monitor, not only for this report, but for her ongoing work with us in order to keep us on track and to make sure we deliver on our commitment to men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces. Her independent, impartial, and external oversight and rigor is going to be crucial to our progress. And accordingly, I have also extended her mandate as external monitor for another year. We know it's necessary for us to keep our foot on the gas, and we're going to continue along the path outlined in Madame Arbour's review to ensure all who wish to serve can do so in an environment that allows them to realize their full potential, an environment that is safe, respectful, and inclusive. We have momentum, and we're not going to lose it. Thank you, and I'll now be happy to take any questions that you may have.
When will you be stripping the military of its jurisdiction to investigate and prosecute military sexual offences? When specifically will you change the law?
Well, we've already taken the steps necessary, and all new cases are now being referred to the civilian criminal justice system. We are also taking the steps that are required to ensure that these matters can be investigated by the police of jurisdiction and not by the military police. In order to make that change permanent, we know that we're going to have to change the law. We've been doing that work in consultation with Madam Justice Arbour and with the Canadian Armed Forces. I'll be bringing forward a legislative solution to that in the coming months and hopefully before the end of this year.
You've mentioned that you've made changes, but in November 2021, your predecessor, Minister Anand, she accepted an interim recommendation by Madame our board to transfer all military sexual offense cases to the civilian system. Since then, there have been 250 cases reported. 50% of those cases are still being investigated by military police. And part of that is the military is going to victims and asking them, laying out the risks and asking them whether or not they want their cases transferred. Is that in the spirit of what the government wanted to happen? For 50% of these cases to still be investigated by military
Frankly, we
police?
want all of these cases to be investigated by the police of jurisdiction and adjudicated within the civilian criminal justice system. That's why we're changing the law. But additionally, some of those cases occurred in jurisdictions outside of Canada, and we've, on those cases, we consult with the victims as to how they wish to proceed. But we are working through that with the Judge Advocate General, with Canadian Armed Forces, and with the Provost Marshal in order to make sure that the spirit of Madam Justice Arbour's recommendation and its intent is fully implemented. I've had a number of conversations with Justice Arbour. She's made it very clear of her intentions, and I'm absolutely committed to ensure that we give reality to those recommendations, and we've also but continue to provide all of the support that the victims of sexual harassment and sexual assault require from the Canadian Armed Forces.
In more than 50 cases, the Provost Marshal's office specifically says that's because they asked the victim whether or not they want to transfer cases. Is it in the spirit of what the government intended for half of the cases to still be investigated by military police?
And the answer to that is I don't believe it is. But at the same time, I also know we've got work to do, working with the Solicitor Generals in provinces and territories right across this country to ensure that the police of jurisdiction are prepared to conduct these investigations. And for all new cases, they've all now been referred to when they move towards prosecution, are being referred into the civilian criminal justice system. We are bringing in legislation that will make very clear what the responsibilities of the Canadian Armed Forces will be with respect to these cases, and we're working very closely with the provinces and territories. And I believe, by the way, with that legislative change, it will be crystal clear to the police of jurisdiction in our provinces and territories across the country that this will be their responsibility to conduct these investigations, and all prosecutions will refer into the civilian criminal justice system.
Until the law changes, is there anything that you can do in the meantime or that you will do to ensure that more cases are being investigated by civilian police?
Yes, ma'am. I've had a number of conversations making it very clear what our expectation is in response of the Canadian Armed Forces in response to those investigations. There are circumstances in each of these cases that we also need to address, but we are addressing it through legislation. All new prosecutions are being referred into the criminal justice system, and we've still got work to do, but we are making very real progress. I've had a number of conversations with Solicitor Generals across the country about the need for the police of jurisdiction to take on these investigations. That was Madam Justice Arbour's recommendation. I agree with that recommendation, and we're going to make it a reality. And
what do you say to victims who say that they feel forgotten about, that people don't realize that this issue is still ongoing, it's still very real to them?
What I would say is I would offer them every assurance we haven't forgotten them. It is important to my government, it's important to me, and I believe it's important to the Canadian Armed Forces to make sure that those victims, first of all, are able to work in an environment, as I've already said, which is respectful, that is safe, and that is inclusive. I also want them to be confident that when they bring forward their concerns, that they will be treated with dignity and respect, and as well that we will make sure that they are provided with the supports that are necessary. The victims of sexual assault are often, victimized not only by the terrible experience that they've gone through, but by the subsequent investigation and prosecution, and they require ongoing support in the form of victim support services, and I want to make sure that that is accessible to them. We've got work to do. We're committed to doing that work. We're making very real progress, as the external monitor has indicated. I think we've got real momentum in bringing about those necessary changes that need to take place. But, we've seen some cases that have not succeeded in the criminal justice system for various reasons. We know that there is more work to do, and we're committed to doing it.
And just lastly, the Provost Marshal's office says that in the two cases where the military sexual offense cases were transferred to civilian police and prosecuted there, and the cases were stayed. We've talked about that in the past.
Yes,
they felt like they reviewed those cases and the military didn't do anything wrong.
And again, I don't think anybody has to be defensive. My greatest concern is for those victims, people that have had that terrible experience. That the processes and systems that we put in place have to be respectful and supportive of them. That's our real commitment, and you know, I don't really feel anybody has to defend themselves as to what they did if they did their job. But what we've heard very clearly, and what Madam Justice Arbour recommended to us, is that it should not be left to the military police to conduct these investigations. That should be conducted in this country by the police of jurisdiction. But there are issues in some communities where bases are located. The police of jurisdiction may be a small thing. That's why a small department may not have the skills and the resources to do those investigations. That's why we've been working with the Solicitor General. But at the same time, the changes that we're making are about the victims. It's about what we need to do to be supportive and respectful and inclusive for them. And so there are changes that are necessary, and we're committed to making those changes.
On the departmental results, obviously there's reports from the report that shows that concurrent operations can no longer be deployed at the same time. Some deteriorating numbers on readiness for sea, land, and air fleets. Are you concerned about the level of readiness of the forces?
Well, first of all, I'm delighted that people actually read the departmental results report this year. We've had a number of those reports, and I'd invite you to go back and look at them. We recognize there are challenges. I was previously the minister responsible for emergency management. I am the minister that frequently called upon the Canadian Armed Forces to come to the aid of Canadians when the provinces and territories asked for our help because an emergency exceeded their capacity. We went to the Canadian Armed Forces, and there was always an impact on that, and it's important to acknowledge and recognize that impact. And at the same time, Canadian Armed Forces have always been there for Canadians, and Canadians are, I think, very sincerely grateful that help has been there for them. But it's important to recognize, and we do, that we have to continue to make investments in the Canadian Armed Forces so that they have the resources, the people, and the capacity they need to respond to the very many challenges at home and abroad. We have many obligations to NATO, to NORAD, in our Arctic and in the Indo-Pacific, and we have an obligation to Canadians to be there for them. My job is to make sure that the Canadian Armed Forces has the people, the resources, the support that they need to do all the very many jobs that we ask of them. Thanks very much. Thank you.